Hey everybody, thanks so much for all the votes and interest, and this scene was overwhelmingly the one that everybody wanted to see broken down, so we're just going to go through all the elements that I did to create this, so it's completely going to be from scratch, and because there's not that many elements, it's going to seem fairly simple, which to be honest it is. It's just more about trying to make sure that all the elements sort of tied together, the lighting, the movement, and just making sure that the textures really popped and had that glistening feel, like they're slick and wet. So with that, let's just get right to it. So this is actually the sketch I created before I did anything for this scene, and I'm just going to go out just to sort of show you the sort of steps and thought process I had. So I use this program called PureRef. It's great for, bringing in stills and sort of organizing and having your thoughts sort of laid out so you can sort of see it together. And at first I was just looking for leaves and drops and trying to get stuff that felt, really, really wet or interesting or sort of crystalline and depth of field, and tried to just get this really interesting rack focus type of feel, perhaps, or just super shallow depth of field. I kept my references fairly limited, so I wasn't all over the place. You can see that they're basically the same thing. I've whittled this down from maybe about 40 or 50 different images, so this was going to be what I was going to use as my reference. And then from there, I then started to create different sketches, ideas. So it was going to be something, they're all going to be sort of same setups, if you will, but I wanted to make sure I really understood for myself how many elements I'm building, how many things I need to block out, and what do I need to care about most. But the whole point of this was for me to have an idea of what I wanted to do, how much I needed to create, and give myself, sort of really good specifics on, like, hey, am I doing streaks of rain? Am I doing high speed that I like as a reference? What type of leaf? And then what other elements I needed to combine in there. So with Zbrush, the main thing was making sure I had pretty good base to block out this frog. So I actually found a 3D scan of one, and then I just basically was going through, cleaning up, trying to make sure I got all the details that were still there. And, the whole point was to make sure I had a T-pose that I could actually use at the end of this. So obviously this was just a sitting frog, so what I had to do was clean it up. All I'm doing here is smoothing it out, remeshing it, ripping apart parts of the legs, and having to rebuild some areas of this. So in terms of the ZBrush modeling, the biggest thing was just having some references nearby that I was just looking at as well, and then just trying to reconfigure to get sort of this sort of splayed out look, like almost as if it was in a T-pose, for me to basically have a base so I could start to rig this model. And then here I'm just remeshing it, making sure that it's low enough poly so I could actually use it. And then once I was ready, I just exported out some different elements. So that was basically the biggest thing, was just getting sure I had a normal and displacement map, and just I'm bringing it in just to test it. And then here I am just setting up the rig, setting up the poses, hand animating this. I just had some slow-mo scenes of frogs that I just watched over and over and over, and I was just using that purely as my basis and just reconfiguring and then changing stuff for deformation, because again, this was used for multiple scenes, this frog, so I had different animations and different setups. So for the rain one, I'll show you that from scratch, but I just wanted to sort of play through sort of the setup. So once I brought the OBJ in and I knew what I was going to do with this, I basically just had a few things set up and then was bit by bit sort of building on to create more life with the frog just in its idle position, so then even when I had animated it would still react and feel like it was breathing and pulsing just like a real animal would. So this was sort of the setup. And then if I go here, again, the joints are here. I'm just hiding them so they don't cover up everything in here. And then inside of my frog null, everything lives inside of here. So once I have my root and everything set up there, I knew sort of I had areas where I could attach new modifiers to, so if you want to think about it like that. So I'm just going to turn off the joints for a second, just so you can see. So all I've done is there's this inside the head and the neck, I have these eyes, and it's literally just one sphere that I've turned when I icosahedron, made it the proper size, and then I set a symmetry, so that way it would just be offset from the center, so that way anything I do to one of these will go to the other one. And I'll show you in a second also how I did the blinking that way. So I'm just trying to do things as efficient as possible. So here you have this breathing, and it's literally just these two elements here. So if I just turn them off, we'll just look at one at a time. So we'll just look at the neck, and all it is a spherify object. So in your deformers, you have spherify. And what I've done is I just positioned it sort of in this area and made sure that it's sort of lined up with where the neck would be. So if I go back to the joints, so it's essentially set up in the same location as that. And then I have a fall off that has the field, and this field, as you can see, is pulsing. So what I'm using right now actually is a grayscale gorilla signal, and I've just set up a noise, and it's just attached purely to this max, so it would just undulate up and down from there. And then when I turn it on, that's what deforms this. Now when I move this, say the neck for instance, nothing happens because I have this espresso tag on it. So this espresso tag essentially says, if I double click it, the neck, which is this bone, I just dragged it in like that, is connected to the spherify neck. I just dragged it in like that. And all I've done is, in the drop down you have all these parameters. It's just like Redshift with the materials, is I've went to the coordinates and set global position and global rotation, link it to the global position and global rotation. So that way, whenever I move this, it will alter that. So if I go back here and I pause and I go to the neck, you can see as I rotate, it's moving this spherify. When it's animating, it won't let me do anything, it just won't update, but once I pause, you can see that this moves with that. And that way, anytime I do any animation or do a pose, it will basically update to that. And I just have to set some keyframes. And then it's the exact same thing for the stomach. All I've done is, let me just hide the neck. I've taken the stomach area, and you can see this, I can move this literally the field, but the actual deformer itself won't move because, again, I double click and I've taken the spine bone from the frog and the spherify stomach and just put, again, global position, global rotation, and then linked it to global position, global rotation. Once I had those two parameters linked together, now whenever I move the spline, it will move that spherify, and the field will go with it since it's a child. And so once I had that set up, no matter what, this will breathe sort of like this. And then the other thing I have in here is, you can see my time frames from 0 to 120. Again, this is just my rig file. It's just for me to test, to figure things out. I actually like to do this. I have a pre-roll, which is essentially me having frames pre the setup, and then I've just animated into this pose just over a few frames. So this way, every time I brought in this rig, I'd have this setup, and I could, whether I want to animate to the sitting pose or animate to, say, the hanging pose, or, any other of the scenes, I could sort of go from here to that. So that's sort of what I've done for every single scene, is basically set keyframes on 0, and then that would be what I want my main pose to be. And then once I have that set up, I can then go and work from there. So that's just sort of a simple setup for this. And then what I did from there is I extended it out a bit more. So again, this is the same setup, it's just over time I just built out new features. This next one is actually more about the eyes. So if I were to go to the joints and turn that off, and we'll just go over to the eyes. Once again, it's just the same setup where I have, one sphere, and this time I changed it to be more the standard I think because once I figured out some UV issues with the other one, and then all I've done is, you know, it's just mirrored again with the symmetry. And then I worked sort of backwards and put in a null underneath the eye. And then this is my membrane. So if I were to take this out, let's just turn that off. This is extraordinarily simple. It just seems like, what is this thing and what's its purpose? So in here essentially is when I looked at videos of eyes for frogs when they blink, they actually have a thin membrane that they cover up when they're going underwater. So that way they can see, and it, you know, helps them out. So all this is literally one sphere that's the same as previous. And then I have a bool. If I turn that on, you can see here it's the same sphere. And then I just put a cube that's just cutting that section. And then I have this sphere. So you can see that now there's a bit of, let me change this a little tiny. So you can see that there's just a little bit of thickness now because there's two different spheres. This cube just, you know, would slide like that. You can get a sense of what's happening there. And then I have this secondary bool that's basically I'm cutting another cut, so I get just this edge. And then that edge goes essentially, if I was to turn that off for a second, just so you see both of them at once. So inside the eye is this, and I've deformed it just slightly. And then it would basically be hidden in there. But what this now allows me to do is I have created an espresso link here for the eye. This eye now, when it blinks, will rotate that other sphere and then rotate back. So as it blinks, it does this reaction. All I'm doing here is I have a pose morph on the frog that I've animated myself. And in the edit mode, you know, you have your base pose, and then I had a blink pose, and then all I've done is set some keys so it would go up and down. Okay, so now that I have this frog set up where it blinks, I have this just showing you the negative frame so you can see it animates into this pose, and it just does this breathing. I'm going to get rid of the negative frames and just start with frame 1 or frame 0. And essentially we're going to basically have this set up where, you know, I have this branch that I've brought in, and all that I've done is literally it's just a cylinder, and then I've added a bend to it. I've angled it this way on purpose just because I wanted it to be like, hey, it's coming from the ground, it's going to go up, bend, and then I've set this so then I can go like this. So as this bends, I would want this frog to essentially try to balance on it. So, you know, that was the first thing I had to tackle, was just figuring that out. So the way I got this bend to continue to undulate was I decided to use a signal tag. So I've already had this set up. It's just to show you the theory, not so much step by step by step, but essentially the strength of this bend here is being controlled inside of this. So then that way it just goes up and down like this. So just so you understand the basics, it's just, you know, the same principle as the breathing. Actually going to just go to the frame 0 and turn that off for just a second. So I'm just going to disable the tag, not the bend itself. You can see that. So once I have that set up in my frog, I have my root, I have all the elements, and I've set up the IK goals. So this way, when I move elements here, as opposed to trying to animate every single joint, I can actually just rotate and move these nulls that are end goals, and you can see that the frog will actually position based on that. So if I was to move these sort of into place, you'll see sort of the building blocks, if you will, of how I set up everything. So as you can see, these goals, they're not perfect in the sense of like it's not working everywhere, but I'd essentially try to stretch this out into the position I want, and then just make sure that they're not too far out to break. So, you know, the first thing I did was I tried to set this up where it felt like he was essentially hanging on this, and then worked bit by bit to get that. So you can sort of see already, you know, in a terrible Titanic, I'm on top of the world. I know I'm old, so that reference won't go for everybody. Work, that sort of gives you this sort of setup. Just gonna hide this bend for a second. But the big thing is, you know, if this is moving, how does that attach to the frog? So it's going to be a little bit of a setup, but I'll sort of just walk you through the theory behind it. And that's why I have this simple cylinder branch versus like a high poly version right now. Is the idea is that on this are vertices, right? Like every single point. And I want to pick points and then say to these goals, stick to that point. That way, as this branch moves, this null will move to that point. And you can see, because of the IK, it will react to it. And then I can add some secondary motion and it'll feel like it's, you know, rocking on that branch. So the first thing I need to do is figure out a way, okay, how do I get points on something? I could, you know, collapse this, and then I could go into the points and pick that. But if I need to change anything, that becomes an issue. So the way I figured out was you can just use something called a correction deformer. So if you add this, I'm just going to add it below. This will essentially allow me now to pick points. Like you can now see I can pick a point. And that's just purely on this correction deformer. So the idea is that if I pick a point here, I then have this bend that's moving, you know, like that in theory will still stay. So you can see it's here as opposed to just floating somewhere else. So that was the biggest point of this correction deformer. And then all I had to do was make multiple ones. So I'm just going to step through sort of one to sort of give you an idea of what I had to do. So, you know, instead of that one, let me pick this point because that seems closer to where the hand is. So once I have that set, you know, I'm pretty much good to go here. I could just name this for right now. Let's just say hand. And R. And then I have this frog, and I know I have the right wrist. I could now do something that would be like this. I could create a new null. I'm just grouping it. And let's just say this is correction R. And then I can add a tag to this in the character tags. Where are you? Rigging tags. I could do a constraint tag. So once I put this on this null, I can then use this to link to the hand. So it's basically just trying to parent one object to another object to the next object. So from there, you have all these options. I'm going to pick lamp, and priority, I'm going to select generators. And then I figure this out, the priority I set to 1. And that's just to make sure that everything else happens, and then this will occur afterwards in case, so there's no lag. And then what I do is down below with the clamp section, there's a to, a mode, and a line. So to origin would be the center of the object, and the mode is fixed position or fixed axis. And then it asks for a target. Well, my target in this case is going to be this hand. So just waiting for this to save. Gotta love autosave on elements. So now I bring this into here, and you can see I now get all these options for the distance and sort of the freezes and things like that. So I can click freeze. It's not going to do anything specific for me right now. But the whole point is that now that I have this sort of parent-child relationship with this point, again, that's the point on this branch, I can then literally have this distance moving. So you can see it's moving based on this red line. It's using this as where it should be pointing to, and that's going to be mostly to do with the fact that, you know, if I was to make a cube, the size of everything and then the distance from the origin, remember, again, everything is really small in the scene. So if I go back to this and the distance set to 0, you can see it just snapped into a place, and you can see it basically looks like it broke. So, you know, you have to sort of figure out exactly what numbers would work exactly for what you need. And then the other thing you can do instead of to origin, like I said, is you can say to point. And then you can see now it's taking that point, and the distance is based on that. So I could do, it won't let you do a negative. So what I tend to do is, because I have this relationship where I have two nulls, I can then get out of the point mode, pick the goal, and then you can see the goal is not where that point is. I can sort of move this accordingly to get it to feel more on axis, and then sort of just adjust. So I'm getting sort of the palm of it, if you will. So again, it's just the broad strokes, trying to get this in a spot, and then I can move the fingers afterwards to feel like it's wrapping around the branch. So now that that's there, and again, this null is for the correction, which is, if I hide, set to the point, it's right here, put that there. If I was to turn on the bend and just move this, you'll see the hand tries to update to that. It will only work up to a certain point because, you know, the arm's just not long enough and it just won't reach there, but you can see that it's trying to lock on to that specific point that I've set on the branch. So once you have that sort of set, the biggest thing is just making sure that priorities work. So I would just be going through here and then making sure maybe it's got to be a -0, or maybe it needs to be expression, and just testing to make sure. So first I'll put the bend, I'll turn that on. So this way the signal is working, and then you can see it's going up and down. And you can see that there's a bit of a lag. So that's what I meant by you need to go to your constraints and make sure that that would be proper to make sure that those link together. And then once you have that, you can then go to the goal and start to move it around. So you get it to a certain point. You can see that that now links to that. So again, that's what I did for all the feet and the hand. So I'll do it one more time because I know it seems like a lot of stuff. So essentially, the whole point is you have your branch. You want to add a constraint. Oh, sorry, a correction. My bad, correction. So you add correction. I'm going to just name this so it looks different so I understand what I'm doing. So this is and L. I'm in my point mode because now it will allow me on this correction deformer to pick a point. So I'm going to turn the frog back on, and I think the point would be something like that. So I'll turn this one off. selecting that point. So again, this hand L is going to be different than this hand R. So now I have 2 points. Then with my frog back on, I understand I have my goal, which is part of my rig. You know, move this around as I need. Now I'm trying to attach this null to that point. So that way it will move accordingly, and then I'll have the offset because I can move this, but at least it will follow that point specifically. So what I'll do is I'll add a new null. I'm just grouping it. I'm going to call this one correction L. Oops, not correct L, correction L. And then I'm going to add a rigging tag constraint. And then in here, I'm going to pick a clamp. And then it's asking for a target. And we know their target is the hand. And then you can see it's giving me a distance. And this is going from the origin. So again, it's trying to, that red line is trying to point to the origin. So I'm going to pick point. And you can see immediately it's now connected to that point. So if I was to just scrub right now, you'll see it's moving with that. So, you know, just jumping up and down like that. Then now I just change my distance to something that makes sense. And then maybe it's 0.05 or something. And then with my goal, I can then change this accordingly. And I would spend my time rotating. I'd adjust the points of other areas and get that to feel right. But again, now when I play this, and I'll just hide the bend because that's in the way, you'll see they move with it. And the whole thing is just making sure that your priority, sometimes it's better just to test to make sure it will lock in properly. And again, that's all I did for all the joints, is just to do this. And once I had them all set up, I could then move my spline goal, adjust there, because again, they're all linked together. You can see it'll still patch, but you gotta set keyframes. So if I say here, say make this goal a little higher or a little lower, you'll see that it will stay accordingly. So again, I'm just doing the exact same thing for the legs. And I'll just do this just in case people didn't get the other two. So the whole point, again, I'm just reiterating over and over again, is the point is, you know, I'm trying to get points on this object that does not, it isn't collapsed. So by using this correction deformer, and this time I'll say, and foot R, I can then choose points on this object. So let's guess somewhere around maybe here, something like that. Because I'm just thinking where the foot would go specifically. And then again, I have my foot, which has the goal, again from the IK, and just trying to move this goal somewhere in the vicinity. So you can see it's somewhat pretty close. I mean, close enough for right now. So it's somewhere around there. And then I'm grouping that null. I'm gonna name this correction R foot. And again, I make those hands and stuff like that. Make it more obvious the naming. I'm gonna right click, add a rigging constraint, clamp. In the clamp section, it's asking for a target. We know it's gonna be the foot. And then it's already added a distance, but it's to the origin, so let's add point. Again, you can see it's linking there. Let's make that to 0. And instead of fixed position, let's do fixed axis. And for these two as well, let's change these to fixed axes. You'll see in a second why I changed that to fixed axis as opposed to fixed position. And now that I'm here, let's just change this goal a little bit. And let's just give this a try. You can see they're moving with it. And this now allows some roving. So you can see that the hand is sliding a little bit. And I actually want that because the whole point is now I can move my goals, and you can see it's moving with it, but it's trying to position around that object, like around the actual branch. So when I move it here, I can then play with this distance a little bit. 1, and then if I want to, I could try to lock it. And you can see it's hovering like that. And then it's now more about me keyframing parts of the other areas of the body. So again, this would now be going into the root, finding the right thigh. Let's do first frame, add a key, and then I'm trying to adjust it. So you can see now I'm rotating, and then I'm rotating a bit. Now I go back to my correction, and underneath is my goal. Slide that down, that over here, and now you can see it's locking like this. Next would be going into all the toes, picking those, making sure I'm on the first frame, and then auto, and rotating that. And you can basically start to get the gist of, like, it's just one small step at a time, getting it stuck to the moving object. And then once I have it stuck to the moving object, I can then sort of recalibrate and move other elements. I'm turning off the animation because the goal I don't want to animate. Just remember, it's just locking in. So again, so this process is how I got this frog to lock on. And then it was, again, like I said, just about making sure that my generators and setting these proper. So if I would go to now this scene, and then just turn this off, you can sort of see I have it basically set up where I have my branch, the corrections. Each of them are named properly with children underneath them. And when I turn on the frog, and then all I've done on top of that is added some secondary motion where these four locations are essentially locked to those areas. And then on the frog itself, I went and added a little bit of animation to the hips with a vibrate tag. So this essentially gets it to rock a little bit back and forth like that. And you can see I even have keys on the hips that are just to make that a bit more extreme, and I just have it going back and forth so I could loop it. That's pretty much all I'm doing. Is this hip section gives you that back and forth. The bend, which is again set up with the branch with the signal tag, is just basically animating this bend location. So then it goes up and down. So this bend will just go back and forth. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is just some more minute changes of the fingers and things like that. So it would latch on. And again, as I said, I used this branch because it was simple and I had very simple geometry to use. And then all I've done is I've gone to Quixel. I downloaded one asset, and I'm just going to do project and paste so you can see it, is literally, so it's much higher quality, and then I have displacement and everything set up, and it's angled this way on purpose because then in here I could bend it to be a little straighter. So that way I'm basically taking out the bend that was in the branch and then using that as the location of this branch. So you can see that once I turn this branch off and force that one on, this frog, if I turn off the joints, now will link to joints there, will link to that. And then it was just more about making sure as it updates. And again, I'm scrubbing, but you know, when you play, it won't intersect like this that way. And that's literally the way I got it to sort of rove and stick on and feel like it's moving around realistically. And then after I had that main part, I just went to the frog itself. Then once I had that major part, and I've literally just added a few keyframes on the neck. And these are just done by hand. And that was basically what's giving you that sort of, it's turning, looking back and forth. Because everything else has been automated, I just need to add just a very little bit of manual animation. And that's sort of how I got this animated rig set up.